For many people, the zombie genre has lost its bite. Zack Snyder's zombie heist movie Army of the Dead received a mixed response, the Resident Evil film franchise has suffered a string of flops, and The Walking Dead dragged on far longer than it had any right to, and even now continues to drag on thanks to its various spin-offs. The recent success of The Last of Us has proven that the zombie genre can be resurrected, but it hasn't actually been dead, it's just not been American. Enter the Korean zombie. While Train to Busan in 2016 wasn't the first Korean zombie movie, it is the one that launched K-zombies to popularity around the world. Since then, there has been a steady stream of incredible and incredibly different K-zombie movies and TV shows. There's the political intrigue of the historical set Kingdom, modern-day high school drama in All of Us Are Dead, and a comedy spin is even offered up in The Odd Family, Zombie on Sale. In this video, I'm going to look at how Korean zombies are largely outrunning their Western counterparts, with the mushroom monsters from The Last of Us being a notable exception. So let's start with the death of the American zombie. I don't think the problem is solely down to oversaturation and a lack of hunger from audiences for zombie stories. Rather, I think much of the zombie content that has been put out in recent years has simply been mediocre or downright bad. Let's take World War Z and The Walking Dead as examples. World War Z came out in 2013 and feels like any other soulless Hollywood disaster movie. The failure of this film feels particularly insulting given the fact that it's based on the Max Brooks novel of the same name. The book is an oral history of the zombie apocalypse, and so it's told from many different perspectives. We hear from doctors, politicians, and soldiers. There are even interviews with a film director and an astronaut. All of this gives a well-rounded view of the socio-political impact of the outbreak. The Brad Pitt-led film completely misses the point of the book by following the story of just one man, even though that man spends the whole movie unrealistically glow-popping. To call World War Z an adaptation is generous. On top of that, the story that the movie does tell isn't even a good one. Brad Pitt's character is utterly forgettable, the plot feels ridiculous and overblown, and the zombies aren't even remotely scary, feeling more like an environmental challenge than a terrifying monster. The Walking Dead TV show, on the other hand, started out strong and slowly got worse and worse. Robert Kirkman originally envisioned the comic as a, quote, zombie movie that never ends, and it'll go for years and years and years, end quote. This dive into what life could look like in the long term in the zombie apocalypse allows time for characters to really change and develop, something which most zombie movies simply don't have time for. Both the comic book and the TV show start off with fantastic characters who we care about, and then we see how continuous tragedy shapes them. The Walking Dead isn't just zombie killing for the sake of mindless gory entertainment. We care about the person doing the killing, and the point of the story was about how humanity was trying to rebuild society. The TV show started to really go off the rails though, although people disagree about when exactly this happened. But around season 7 in 2016, give or take a few seasons and years, the show began to feel like a trashy soap opera, but with zombies. Storylines felt like they were being dragged out and newly added characters lacked personality, aside from the very charismatic Negan. In short, it got boring. It wasn't saying anything interesting about how people react in a post-apocalyptic world, and the zombies themselves, while often done up with impressive makeup and prosthetics, lacked in-world impact. With so much substandard zombie content being put onto people's screens, it's no wonder that the zombie boom ended. Except, it didn't really end. At least not for those who were happy to read subtitles. Korean zombies are currently taking the world by storm, and I think there are 3 main reasons for this. Firstly, Korean zombie movies and TV shows explore wider societal issues, as American zombie movies used to do. It's been well established that George A. Romero's 1978 Dawn of the Dead is a critique of consumerism, but I don't think 2009's Zombieland was attempting to make any kind of insightful point about the state of society. In an Atlantic article from 2015, Mike Mariani argues that, quote, American pop culture has used the zombie as a form of escapism, rather than a vehicle to explore its own past or current fears, end quote. Essentially, he's saying that recent zombie films and shows romanticize the post-apocalypse because it's free from the worries of daily life. Seen in this way, quote, the zombie apocalypse isn't an outlet for fears, but for fantasies, functioning as an escape hatch into a world with higher dramatic stakes, fewer people, and the chance to reinvent oneself, for better or worse. End quote. But Korean zombie films and shows hark back to earlier iterations of the zombie by using them as a mirror to reflect issues and anxieties faced in real life. All of Us Are Dead follows the students of Busan High School in their attempts to survive the zombie outbreak, and by centering teenagers, it's able to reflect on the tragedy of the Sewol ferry disaster in 2014. Of the 476 passengers and crew who were aboard the sinking ferry, 306 died, with 250 of this number being high school students. Even while the ship was sinking, passengers were told to remain on board, and the vast majority of the students complied because Korean culture instills in children that they must obey adults and figures of authority. All of Us Are Dead comments on this tragedy by including the theme of adults failing the youth. Initially, the characters believe that someone will come to save them, but that doesn't prove to be true, and it completely erodes their faith in adults.
더 엄청 날아다녔어. 구할 생각 있었으면 벌써 했겠다.
아이, 어른들이 알아서 구하러 오겠지.
여기 있고 싶음 있어. 근데 난 어른들 안 믿어.
우리 왜 버렸어요? 우리 버린 거 맞잖아요.
조사에 협조만 잘해주면.
아니요. 나 다시는 어른들한테 아무 부탁 안 할 거야.
나중에 누군가라도 이 영상 보면 관계자들 꼭 처벌해주세요.
The kids recording messages for their parents in case they don't make it is also reminiscent of the ferry tragedy, as a video recording was recovered from the phone of one of the deceased students.
아빠 사랑해, 둘 다 사랑해.
Another nod to the tragedy comes in the final episode, when we see yellow ribbons in remembrance of the dead tied to the branches of a tree. In the aftermath of Sewol's sinking, people tied yellow ribbons to the gate, fences and trees around Danwon High School. All of Us Are Dead also tackles bullying, which is obviously an issue everywhere, not just in Korea. The first zombie in the show is created accidentally by science teacher Byung-chan, who infects his son Jinsu with a virus intended to remove fear and up aggression in order to help him stand up to the kids who are bullying him. As well as essentially being the motivation for creating the zombies, bullying is also seen throughout the show. Guinam, the show's main antagonist, is basically the school's head bully, while rich girl Nyayeon is incredibly cruel to Gyeongsu for being from a poor family. A common theme in K-zombie movies and shows is the class divide. In Seoul Station, which is the animated prequel to Train to Busan, it's shown that the zombie outbreak got out of control because it spread amongst the homeless people first. The suffering of these people was ignored by everyone else in society, and so the disease was able to run rampant. This can also be seen in Kingdom, which follows a zombie outbreak during the Joseon period, likely around the 16th century, though it isn't specified. The outbreak starts because starving commoners unknowingly eat infected meat, but the wealthy people at court don't care about the poor people in rural villages dying and then reanimating. The main character, Crown Prince Lee Chang, is the only person in a position of power who attempts to help.
무능하기만 한가? 악독하기 그지없다. 내 놈이 어제 군영을 걸어장가 죄 없는 백성들이 수없이 죽었다. 그 문을 열었다면 병사들이 위험했을 것이오.
While the others at court simply use the chaos of the outbreak as a chance to elevate their own political positions.
나도 저것들을 이용해 관제를 누릴 것이다.
Happiness also touches on the class divide. It's largely set in an expensive apartment building, and the disease means that a few staff members are forced to quarantine inside. Throughout the show, these workers are treated incredibly poorly by the rich residents. Clearly, zombies are often used to reflect fears and issues in Korean society, but that isn't the only reason that they're now dominating the genre. They also tell genuinely compelling personal stories. For instance, in Train to Busan, we follow an overworked dad, Seok-woo, who always puts his job first and as a result has a poor relationship with his young daughter, Soo-an. Seok-woo's work ethic is incredibly common in Korea and is part of bali work culture, which means hurry hurry or quickly quickly. And so his character also feeds into commentary on Korean society. Tae-jae Lee, the executive creative director at FCB Seoul, told Digiday in 2017 that, quote, "It took Korea 40 years to recover from the Japanese occupation, which was expected to take over 100 years. So Koreans have learned that if we work together, we can improve the country, but we have to bali to become successful." End quote. Although bali culture led to South Korea's incredibly rapid economic growth, it has also taken a personal toll. In Train to Busan, we see this in Seok-woo not having time to devote to his daughter. He's also become a selfish person, and when zombies start tearing people apart on the train, the selfishness manifests as him disregarding the safety of everyone but himself and Soo-an.
지금 같은 때는 자기 자신이 제일 우선이야. 알았어?
아빠는 자기밖에 몰라.
잘 알겠네. 쓸모없어지면 그냥 버리고 가는 거.
But over the course of the movie, we see him start to change his behaviour and become more like the selfless dad-to-be Sang-hwa, who's the true hero of the movie. This serves as the emotional core of the film, giving the audience something to really care about while the zombies pick people off. The mixture of people from different classes and walks of life on the train also leads to a messy group dynamic, something which also lies at the heart of Happiness, a show which is largely an exploration of how people react in high-pressure situations. But there's also some classic K-drama slow burn romance simmering in the background. Sebom and Yihan were high school best friends and are now police officers. They pretend to be a married couple in order to secure a fancy apartment in the building that eventually goes into lockdown. We watch their relationship slowly take shape as they team up to try and protect the other residents, many of whom are a nightmare to deal with. Romance is also a part of All of Us Are Dead, which should be expected given that it's about a group of high school students. It's the group dynamics of who likes who and who wants to feed who to zombies that grounds the show. High school is already a stressful social situation, but the hallways being filled with flesh-eating monsters acts as a pressure cooker. It brings out the absolute worst in people, but it also allows others to forge unlikely friendships. Aside from the cultural relevance and interesting characters, there's a very important third reason for why I think Korea is dominating the genre. The zombies feel like an actual threat. While great zombie movies tend to have a message and interesting character arcs, there's no denying that the zombies themselves have to feel threatening. Zombie movies usually are, after all, horror movies, and so audiences expect horror. Often in American movies and TV shows, the zombies don't feel that scary, or like they pose that much of a challenge to the human characters. In the two Zombieland movies, for instance, the undead are picked off easily and often in playful ways. There's even a zombie kill of the week segment, which just demonstrates how little of a threat they really are. But in Korean movies and TV shows, the zombies are designed to be scary instead of silly. They've obviously got the jerky movements and quick pace going for them, but this style of zombie isn't that much of a problem if you have a gun. A common complaint against the zombie genre is that it's merely a power fantasy. In 2021, writer Anthony Gramuglia summed this up as the, quote, fantasy of going out and stopping hordes of non-complicated monsters without any social order. There is no need to think about killing a zombie. Zombies are just fodder for spectacular kills. End quote. I'm not saying that this doesn't apply to some zombie stories, but we have to acknowledge that this all-guns-blazing approach is distinctly American. Guns are not easily acquired everywhere in the world, and as a result, countries with virtually no guns tend not to feature badass characters gleefully taking down hordes of the undead. Films like The Night Eats the World from France and Shaun of the Dead from the UK are proof of that. In both films, characters do end up finding a gun, but the weapon isn't very heavily used. Movies from these countries tend to be about survival by evading and outsmarting zombies, and as a result, the zombies tend to feel like an actual threat, because they're not as easy to kill when you're armed with just a kitchen knife or a baseball bat. Guns are not common in Korea, and so their zombie movies don't typically have that much zombie killing. Shoving and hitting, yes, but outright killing, not so much. In Train to Busan, for instance, they figure out that sight is one of the zombies' weaknesses, so they put newspaper over the doors so that they can't be seen by the ravenous infected, and use darkness to their advantage when the train goes through tunnels. All of Us Are Dead sees Namra using sound to the survivors' advantage by coming up with a plan to use the school's speaker system to draw the zombies away from their location. In Happiness, the characters actively try not to kill zombies because they aren't the typical undead. Instead, the disease is more like a sickness where people temporarily lose control of themselves. But because they're definitely still alive, there's a greater effort to simply restrain them. The power fantasy theory definitely does not apply here. In Kingdom, there is some gun use, but given that it's set in the Joseon period, they use muskets that take a long time to reload and so aren't that effective against hordes of the undead. It's far faster for skilled archers to use their bow and arrows or for the swordsmen to chop them down. Unlike the previous examples, Kingdom does show skilled fighters going up against zombies, but the weapons they use are far more interesting than guns. Plus, like Happiness, Kingdom has a different take on the zombie itself, and finding out the details of the disease and how it manifests adds some mystery and intrigue. Typically, taking on even just one zombie proves to be a struggle in Korean movies and shows, and as a result, they seem way more terrifying and provide way more tension. Alive is a great example of that. Near the beginning of the film, Junwoo has to deal with his neighbour turning into a zombie in his apartment, and even though it's just the one that he's dealing with, it feels incredibly tense. This makes the scenes where there are hordes of the infected feel extra dangerous. I'm not saying that every K-zombie movie and show is a work of art. For instance, Train to Busan's sequel, Peninsula, is all about spectacle rather than storytelling, and as a result it falls short of the heights that its predecessor reached. Peninsula feels far more like an empty action flick than it does a well-crafted horror film. And I stopped watching 2023's Gangnam Zombie about 15 minutes in, because it was so poorly made and didn't seem to be doing anything exciting in terms of character or story that made it worth fighting through. But in general, Korean zombie films feel both smarter and scarier than their American counterparts. They feel more creative and unique, giving audiences different manifestations of the virus, different types of character to root for and hate, different critiques of Korean culture, and different environments and time periods for the outbreaks to take place in. I don't know how long the K-zombie reign will last, but here's hoping that there's more to come.